As globalization binds nations closer together, borders and barriers are becoming increasingly obsolete. Nowhere is this trend more visible than in the Middle East, where violence and destruction will spill over throughout the neighborhood in 2019. I'm your host Shirvan, and welcome to Caspian Report. In the previous years, the center of gravity in the Middle East revolved around ISIS. In 2019, that focus will shift towards Iran. Following the demise of the jihadist group, Iranian proxies strengthened their foothold across the periphery. In Iraq, Tehran is working to integrate its Shia militias into the Iraqi military, thereby cementing its influence. Meanwhile, in Syria, the Iranians are reinforcing their proxies and building up assets across the Syrian landscape as a deterrent to Israel. Tehran is also supplying Hezbollah with sophisticated weapons and precision-guided missiles. Having said that, Iran is not without its own complications. Foremost, its currency has depreciated substantially in value over the past year, and America's annulment of the nuclear deal and the sanctions that went into effect in November 2018 have aggravated the socio-economic situation in Iran. In addition, there is a tug-of-war brewing in Tehran between the political ruling class loyal to President Rouhani and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps regarding the liberalization of the economy. Essentially, over the next year, Iran will be distracted and tight on money, which will restrain its actions in 2019. For some countries, however, Iran's troubles present the perfect time to strike. Looking at 2019, US National Security Advisor John Bolton and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will try to forge new coalitions to contain the ambitions of Tehran. One such pact is the Middle East Strategic Alliance, also known as the Arab NATO, which is still in the making. Another front involves the Kurdish militias in the northwest of Iran, with whom the Americans have cultivated deep ties. Washington could also encourage insurgencies in the Iranian regions of Sistan, Khuzestan, and Balochistan. However, to truly contain Iran, the United States will have to rely on its allies with similar objectives. Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates will readily endorse the anti-Iran activities, but they will have to first overcome decades of hostilities and misgivings. For the time being, every nation has its own issues to consider. In Saudi Arabia, the stain of the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi will linger on the House of Saud. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman will come under increasing international scrutiny, but it will not fundamentally alter the status quo. Beyond the Crown Prince, Riyadh will also make progress on its Vision 2030 initiative. The government is expected to ease up on austerity measures and promote economic activity in the non-oil sectors. For more on this, watch our geo-economic analysis of the Saudi Vision 2030. South of the Arabian Peninsula, the fighting in Yemen has proven to be exceedingly costly for the involved powers, not to mention for the 16 million civilians who lack access to necessities such as food, shelter, and medicine. In November 2018, the US Senate voted to move ahead with a bill to end America's involvement in the Yemeni conflict. Once the Democrats assumed control of the House of Representatives in January 2019, US pressure to end the conflict could increase. Meanwhile, in Tehran, there are calls to negotiate an arrangement with the Americans by scaling down Iranian commitment in Yemen for concessions on the US sanctions. With the Americans and Iranians largely on the same page, 2019 presents an opportunity for genuine peace talks. In the Levant, a new flashpoint is emerging. Hezbollah, backed by Iran, has acquired sophisticated precision-guided munitions and manufactures them inside Lebanon. For Israel, this is a strategic dilemma, and its policymakers believe that they must strike at Hezbollah while it's still preoccupied with the Syrian civil war. As such, in 2019, we could see an Israeli air offensive that targets the Iranian Hezbollah supply lines in Syria as well as Lebanon, with the mission to destroy facilities, factories, and storage sites for guided munitions. In doing so, the Israelis will have to tread carefully as not to accidentally cross paths with Russia, which also has assets on the ground in Syria. Besides the fact that such a military offensive would violate international law, as well as cause a great deal of collateral destruction, airstrikes can only do so much damage to a well-entrenched foe. In the last war against Hezbollah, Israel inflicted enormous damage in Lebanon, but ultimately failed to achieve its objective. A similar outcome is likely for the coming air offensive unless Israel commits ground forces as well. Our report on the Israeli-Iranian proxy conflict has more on this topic. Elsewhere in Syria, the civil war is entering its closing phase. Perhaps the most fundamental change is America's exit, which President Trump announced in December 2018. No deadline was given for the departure, but the decision will ultimately grant the Russians and Iranians an advantage. In the province of Idlib, the situation will remain particularly sensitive in 2019. Turkey has pledged to protect the region and wants to commit troops. However, the Turkish-backed militias do not see eye to eye, and are fighting among themselves. At the same time, al-Assad has vowed to retake the province, while Russian, Iranian, Kurdish, French, and American forces and assets are all situated nearby. With so many opposing contingents in such a congested area, the risk for an accidental escalation or confrontation is higher than ever. As for the friction between Ankara and Washington, a negotiated settlement is the most likely outcome. Although the Turks and Americans are both hostile to al-Assad, the two disagree over the next phase of the conflict. The Americans see ISIS as the priority, and the closest partner in the fight is the YPG, which is the Kurdish militant group in control of northeastern Syria. Meanwhile, the Turks want to ensure their own national security by denying the YPG and like-minded militant groups a safe haven in Syria. In this context, it should be noted that the YPG is a de facto extension of the PKK, which in turn is recognized as a terrorist group. To settle their differences, Turkey and the United States will have to negotiate a deal. Washington is not likely to sell out the Syrian Kurds entirely so long as ISIS remains a credible threat. It will, however, make minor territorial concessions to Turkey without undermining the essential integrity of the Syrian Kurdish militias. President Erdogan's proposal for a safe zone along the Turkish border and the YPG-controlled territories is one such arrangement that is being considered. Nevertheless, at the end of the day, in spite of the political rhetoric, Turkey needs the United States, since it cannot stand against Russia as an equal, and the United States needs Turkey to counter Russia in the Black Sea, the Balkans, and the Caucasus, especially since the geopolitical rivalry between Washington and Moscow is set to escalate over the course of 2019. Beyond geopolitics, the Turkish economy is in distress. High levels of debt, increasing inflation, diminishing foreign currency reserves, and a negative account balance are the most urgent challenges that the country will face in 2019, which entails that the Turkish economy will be susceptible to external developments. So Erdogan has his work cut out if he is to prevent another lira crisis. Moving on to North Africa, where the Algerian government is reshuffling the top bracket of its military, police, and security forces. The country has a complex power-sharing triangle that involves the civilian government, the ruling party, and the military. For over a decade, high-ranking military officials have been trying to break from this status quo by presenting the army as the arbiter of Algerian politics. This has upset the civilian government and the ruling party. As such, the ongoing purge is likely an attempt to place the military back to its constitutional place. Another consideration for the purge is the timing. In the first quarter of 2019, Algeria will hold presidential elections. At the age of 81, sitting President Bouteflika plans to run for a fifth term. Not everyone agrees with that decision, and opposition has been growing, so the government will have to take heed with the ongoing purge as not to upset the established elite. In Libya, France and Italy find themselves on opposite ends as they compete over influence. Officials in Paris and Rome want to see a stable and unified Libyan state, which would halt the flow of African migrants and prevent the area from turning into a sanctuary for jihadist militants. Yet, try as they might, France and Italy back opposite sides in the Libyan crisis, with conflicting goals. This European-based geopolitical competition for influence is the latest factor that hurts the already complicated peace process to unite the rival factions in Libya. Further to the west, in Morocco, some promising developments are emerging in the peace talks between the government in Rabat and the Polisario Front, which is the group that claims the Western Sahara region. The peace talks froze in 2012, but recently the two sides agreed to meet for talks. Morocco has also reached out to Algeria to resolve their border dispute, but the Algerians have yet to respond to the proposal. Morocco's relationship with Algeria, the Polisario Front, and even Iran are all interlinked. Algeria is the main backer of the Polisario Front in the Western Sahara region, while it is assumed that Hezbollah, through the Iranian diplomatic channels in Algeria, is also arming the separatists. So, starting in 2019, Morocco will try to repair its foreign ties, but it will be a slow and complicated process. Altogether, the Middle East will remain susceptible to foreign players, trade, exchange, and conflict. But the primary catalyst for the ongoing violence and instability can be attributed to the geopolitical competition between the regional powers, which will spill over to the wider periphery in 2019. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. Credit goes to our community on Patreon for voting on this topic and giving us the means to research and produce it. If you want to gain access to some perks like PDF files, early access, etc., visit patreon.com/Caspian Report. For now, thank you for your patience and Sarol.